Why do poor foxes and wolves get picked on? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Book Reviews. I am your host here, Kyron, live on the 11th of December 2024, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, as always on a Wednesday. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I reveal my Animorph power. No, that's a little throwback for those who watched the Animorph show. I am not doing that today. I do not have Animorph powers. I wish I did, but we will find some slightly similar things in this book here, the Fables of Aesop by Aesop, as you would surmise. So, when was this book published? Well, I have no idea. Aesop lived from around 620 BC to somewhere in the 500s. He collected these stories, collated them, perhaps even crafted a few himself, who knows, in this time period. And so published whenever, sometime around, could be centuries after that. The book itself is about 140 pages in length. I've got a rather weathered version here. Probably took me about 2 hours reading to get through in total. So these are a series of extremely small stories, aka fables, with usually a proverb at the end of them to sum them up. And when I say small, I mean 2 sentences to maybe 6 or 7 at max, usually probably around the 3 or 4. Very, very short. They're mostly told via animals, so think of things like foxes, wolves, dogs, snakes, eagles, particularly ones that you would find in ancient Greece, where I believe he was from, Aesop. Yeah, I think so. And they're interacting in various contexts, sometimes like half human, half animal. We'll get into that shortly. There's a lot of fan favorites in here. You know, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, for example, The Fox and the Sour Grapes, all of these sorts of real famous ones, and then also others which are a lot more unknown. Now, there's about 200 fables in this book, and there's an illustration on about half of them, so you really get to see things here. I'll read out a couple here. The goat herd and the wild goats, the frogs asking for a king, the lion and the dolphin, the birds, the beasts and the bat, the partridge and the falconer. They're usually pretty simple titles, nothing too crazy to be found within there. So let's jump on to some of the themes and questions that we can find with this book. And, look, this is a short book. It's a lot of fables. I read this primarily because I just needed a little filler in between some bigger books that I'm reading at the moment, which I will get to shortly. So there's not going to be a huge, massive one here. So who is this book for, and can you apply these fables to everyday life? I suppose would be one of the main questions that I got from this. So the typical fable goes as such. You have 2 animals interacting with each other, one in a half-human, half-animal setting. So they'll usually be out in the wilderness somewhere, but sometimes they'll be in a human context as well. And then they will have, like, for example, they're talking to each other. So once again, this is this anamorphic power almost, and they will come to an agreement to hunt together, for example. So it's something animals might do, or and there's a lot of crossover with what humans would do as well. Something happens, and there's a general lesson to be learned from it. Usually, it's a cautionary tale, highlighting the effect of a negative trait, rather than a positive one, amplifying a positive one. I'm just jumping here to a random page, and we'll read out the mischievous dog. There was a dog so wild and mischievous that his master was forced to suspend a bell from his neck, so that all the neighbors would be warned of his presence. The dog grew proud of his bell, and ran through the marketplace with it jingling loudly. An old hound, fed up with the noise, said to him, "Why do you make such an exhibition of yourself? That bell is not a reward, but a mark of disgrace, a public notice to all to avoid you." Notoriety is often mistaken for fame. And then we've got this little picture of a dog here who is getting chastised by an older one. So I'd say this is mostly addressed to kids, if I had to answer that question I just posed. For several reasons. They're rather short and pithy, and right at the end here we've got I don't know what you call this, a glossary, an index to morals. And quite a few of these are they're really short, which helps to really highlight, I guess, how how easy they are to understand. A couple of ones. Attempt not impossibilities. Avoid neighbors who are too powerful. Every man for himself. Keep to your place, and your place will keep you. There's a whole bunch of longer ones here, such as like, it shows an evil disposition to take advantage of those in distress. United we stand, divided we fall. You can't eat a jewel. The wise man says nothing in dangerous times. I mean, like this goes on and on. Stoop to conquer. Quality before quantity. You've probably heard a lot of these before without maybe even realizing that these are a fable. And, it's hard to say, did these exist before the fables? I mean, it's kind of hard to beat 2500 BCE. Sorry, not 2500 years ago of heritage and history, and then those work their way into other things. So, there's certainly short and pithy and easy for kids in that sense. In this version, there are many illustrations, of course, and also lending to that idea that this is more for kids. I'm going to attempt a word here that I don't think actually exists. Anthropomorphization of animals. So anthropomorphism is when you take an animal and attach human quality traits to it. And so the ization of that is an easy way to make stories fun and understandable. The animals in this, I find, have a general rating system, or their human qualities are rather stuck in stone for most of the fables. So in general, foxes and wolves are tricky and malicious. Asses, aka donkeys or mules, are dumb and silly. Lions, powerful and serious, perhaps even arrogant. Oxes, usually wise and steady. Dogs, stupid and unlucky. And snakes, evil, for example. So there is a rather set in stone sort of thing. Can you apply these? Is it unjust to perhaps do this to animals? I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that too much, but that's certainly what happens in this. Now, actually applying these to everyday life would be hard, though. And the reason for this is because they're not grouped into rules of thumb. As you're reading through this, list of fables, and I don't think they're really assorted in any particular manner, not that I could tell. They're not grouped into like things related to arrogance, things related to male qualities or female qualities. In fact, there's not any distinction between that. I think it's very rare. I don't think there's anything in here that actually distinguishes between male and female, which is rather interesting. So in terms of broadness to humans, it actually works quite well in that sense. But they deal with generalities, but they may be too general. And so it does feel like I just could create one, stick it into this book at random, and it would kind of make sense. Nobody would be the wiser. So let's just say my moral would be happiness becomes its own misery. I just created that. And I have a story of a bird who finds, let's say she finds a bell and really enjoys it. The bell brings her so much happiness that when it goes away and rusts, that it is now causing the cause of her misery. Is that a moral? I guess, kind of. Is it one that's particularly wise? No, because I just created it. So there's all these. I actually think you could create a rather fun narrative out of all of these by attaching them all together. So let's say this is a story that I've just created of the greedy lion who doesn't share and then gets abused when injured the next day by the ass, who then thinks he is powerful and gets smacked by a human for his arrogance or for his foolishness, for dancing around, and then this human boasts about his previous accomplishments to other humans. All of those were actually stories that were within this, and yet it's kind of contradictory at times. So there's certainly ones in here where if it didn't have this little moral at the ending, I would not know what to take away from this, whether it be on the main character. Well, there's two main characters, they're both doing things. What's the moral to take from this? Should you not be arrogant, or should you be humble? There's so much in this where it's like you could have very similar stories, and I'm not going to bother to do it in here particularly, but you could have two stories that are very similar, and yet have the opposite moral coming from it, which I find rather unhelpful in terms of actually applying this to everyday life. So overall, I actually wonder if the whole point of this is just to teach kids to be wary of animals and humans. So many of the fables, for example, blame the good people, and the kids are rather naive by nature. And was this an attempt to kind of drive that out? Was the common sense of the day not so common sense to us now, and are what we would perhaps call paranoia, because our trust systems are much, much different to what they had back in the day. And, if, for example, a modern version of this would be if I'm walking on a pedestrian crossing and then a car hits me, would the moral of this be like, trust, don't trust in the pedestrian crossings, trust in not putting yourself in the place of in front of a car? Maybe is that a useful or helpful moral? I mean, it's helpful to double check. I think that's a good thing to do while crossing, but there's all sorts of things where it's just like, I'm not sure how applicable these are, and they're so general, they're so broad that they're fun and pithy to talk about, perhaps after the fact, but before the fact, I'm not so sure. So anyway, let's jump on to the author, some extra details. So he was an ancient Greek slave who was born in 620 BCE. I actually have a little bit of history here. On the Greek island of Samos, a slave by birth, he served 2 different masters before he was freed as a reward for his learning and wit. He then traveled throughout Greece, telling his fables until he came to the attention of King Croesus of Lydia, who invited him into his court. And then it talks about the tales for which Aesop is remembered were eventually recorded in Greek and Latin verse during the Christian era and were widely circulated in a prose version compiled by a Byzantine scholar during the 14th century. It does not mention that he actually got killed for being arrogant and going to some other court and was beheaded or something like that. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure if he was beheaded. But he got killed on these kind of envoy duties. So perhaps should have learned from his own tales here. Everything that else about him and this book is, I think, up for debate. How many of them did he create? Was he more of a compiler than a creator? How much have they changed from the original oral tradition, which is what they would have derived from? Are there any missing or that was censored? All of these are up for debate. All of these are up for question. So it's very possible that all of these fables are almost unrecognizable if you were to go back in the day and you'd be like, what the fuck? Like this is not the moral that was meant to come from the fox looking at the grapes and then complaining that they would be sour just because he couldn't reach them. So some are very random without the quippy final sentence, and I do have an example of that as well. So jumping on to page 36 here, right at the bottom, we have the dolphins, the whales, and the sprat. And the dolphins and whales were waging a fierce war. While the battle was at its height, a sprat lifted its head out of the waves and tried to mediate. But one of the dolphins exclaimed, "Leave us alone. We'd rather perish than be reconciled by you." Now, what the hell do you take from that? Do you take from this that and this is what I'm saying, like the morals from these stories they're not obvious. And so from this one, it's like, okay, is this the moral should be don't let your arrogance fool you or trick you into dying needlessly, like these dolphins probably would if they're fighting whales. Would the moral be, if you're a sprat and you're a lowly person, know your place? And this could be a moral back in the day of Greek slaves. That could be like, don't speak out of your place, which nowadays would probably condemn, because it's like, well, would condemn the whole idea of having a slave in the first place. I think that's just a good example, being like, okay, most of these are based probably more around the moral rather than the story itself. So I would not be surprised if this was one of those ones where the moral came first and then a funny little story was added to it to highlight it, to make it more memorable. So that's essentially what I would come from this, which would be very opposite compared to someone like the creator of Dr. Seuss, who he was saying kids can smell a moral from a mile off. And so if you try and start with the moral and then create a story around it, he argues that that's a terrible way of writing things. You know, that's probably, this book is probably an example refuting that, saying like, hey, you know, all of these morals are here. People know about the fox and the grapes, the boy who cried wolf, the goose who laid the golden eggs, all these sorts of things. And they likely started as a moral. So, you know, there we go. Suck it, Dr. Seuss. All right, let's jump to the final summary, similar books, recommendations. It's a short, fun read. Look, I can't say that I really connected with any of the stories because it's going to be very hard to. They're only 5 sentences long. But there are many that are certainly memorable, and most that people would not have heard of before. It's kind of fun to go through and just be like, oh yeah, I know that one. I've heard of that one. And you can go through quite a few and be like, yeah, not too bad. I'm surprised that I know these things. There's very pretty illustrations in this version here, which is, I'm not actually sure which version I have, probably Quality Paperback Book Club, New York. It's actually created in 1995, printed in the United States, and I believe my dad got this when he was there. So yeah, this is you can find various versions of this. Most of them are called Aesop's Fables rather than the Fables of Aesop. So that's the version I have. And John Tenniel is known for his illustrations for Alice in Wonderland, I believe the first version of that. So yeah, it's good. Maybe something you'd read to your kids in the evening. And overall, I'm going to give the Fables of Aesop by Aesop 5 out of 10. Like, what can I give it, really? It was just a fun, short little read. No real recommendations from this. I'm trying to think of... there might be some books, such as I believe Kevin Kelly had a little book of wisdom or something like that. You know, you'll find things like this. Inspirational quotes probably come similar to this. I remember I had a whole collection of Bible stories as a kid that my part of my family gave to my father to read to me. I'm not sure if he ever did, probably didn't. And these would also have very similar short little Bible stories with a moral attached to it. So you'll probably find something like that if you want a religious version to that as well. So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I do see a live comment here. I'll get to you shortly, James. But this is a value for value podcast, and that means I do this upfront, free of time, free of value to you. You're never going to have to pay for this. There's no ads. There's no sponsorships. There's no people wheeling and dealing in the background. This is all done for the love of books and reviewing them. And I just ask that you give some value back. And boy, oh boy, did someone give some value back this week. So we've got to give a massive, massive shout out to Vratislav Karpisek. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, mate. It's very hard to say, and it also has accents on some of these letters, and so I could definitely be pronouncing that wrong. But Vratislav has reached out to me before, personally, via Facebook Messenger, and has been very encouraging. He really enjoys the book reviews, and he showed some of that appreciation this week by sending in a PayPal, and a big one at that. So he sent in $31.15. So first of all, thank you so much, Vratislav. That, for those who don't know, that probably covers about 2 months of our audio hosting at the moment. So massive shout out to him. Thank you for that. Wisdom and entertainment. Thank you. That was his message. And look, that is so heartwarming. Thank you for that, Vratislav. And it does make a difference. You know, these are the sorts of things that help Juan and I continue these. I see Juan actually in the chat as well saying, yo. So thank you, Vratislav, for allowing that wisdom and entertainment to happen. So there's other ways you can help support the show, not just monetarily. And some of these would be to, share, join in the live streams. Really do appreciate that. But also sending in book recommendations, things you think I would enjoy, your thoughts on these books. People regularly write in comments on the YouTube, which is probably the easiest place to leave a comment. But if you reach out personally as well, or if you'd prefer to remain anonymous, you can join in we have a Discord as well where we sometimes talk about books and such. I know someone joined recently coming from the Paul Carter book review I did, which was Don't Tell My Mum I Work on the Rig. She Thinks I'm a Piano Player in a Whorehouse. How's that for a book title? And also very clickbaity book title. If you want more of that, go check out the book review I did of it. So you can also join in live. I told you the time, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday. We do have James Gerati. He says, stoked to see you still making these videos, man. You've shown me so many cool books over the years and months. Much appreciated, man. I do really enjoy doing these. I love doing these, in fact. Highlight of my week? Yeah, they're pretty up there. They're pretty up there. And so, yeah, definitely do intend to keep these going for... honestly, I'm struggling to think of a time when I would stop. Obviously, things can change in the future, like 2 decades. Who can even imagine what will any of us will be doing in 2 decades? But certainly for the next couple of years, Juan and I will continue doing these. What's coming up for the future? I know you're sick of me saying this, but the Machado GSS book, Memorias Póstumas de Brás Cubas, I did finally have another crack at reading it yesterday. I do hope to finish it this week. So maybe that one next. I'm reading Ender's Game by Scott Carson. I believe that's the author. I'm reading the Devil Take the Hindmost by Edward Chancellor. History of Financial Speculation. That one's going to be a huge book review. Because I've taken so many notes from that. It's probably even going to turn into a Mere Mortals podcast as well. I'm going to read Daybang by Roosh V. I have an autobiography by Darren Hayes, the singer of the band Savage Garden, and also a singer in his own right, and that has a very special connection to me, so that is why I'm reading that one. And there was a book that I just wrote down recently where I was like, what the hell? The Gilded Age by Mark Twain. I'm going to be reading that soon as well, so that's very high up on the list. So, whole bunch of books to come up in the near future. And if you have any recommendations, as I said, reach out to us on any of our channels of communication, and I'd love to know that. So we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in, and I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Ciao for now. Kyron out.